2 Corinthians chapter 11, and now we're going to look at this in a different way, because one thing that we know different now is, and remember we said this at the beginning of Romans, that once we understood Romans, that it would help us to understand the whole New Testament in a different way. And I think now, as we're at this place, now when we read this, we're going to see this from a different way, because what we're going to see is, now we know what Paul's, what the good news that Paul taught, right? Whoa, are you something? Holy Lord. So we see now Paul's gospel. What we learn now is Paul's gospel is not necessarily the gospel that we think in the Western world or in the Gentile Christian world. We see now that Paul's gospel is something different. Now when we read this, we're going to see it from a different place, I think. And that's why last Saturday, after the message or whatever, was around the table talking, and I don't know how it came up, or some of us were talking, I don't remember how it came up or what it says, but I said something about another Jesus. And I said, it sounds like another Jesus. And somebody said, what does that mean? And it comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 11. So it's kind of been on my heart the last couple of Saturdays. It's kind of been pounding around my heart, like, what does that mean? And so let's just look at that a little bit. So this is Paul talking. Maybe we need to set a little bit of a stage here in Corinthians. The Corinthian church, and I'm sure all of you know this, but the Corinthian church was not. We've learned that a lot of these churches, like Galatia, for example, when he's talking about the Gentiles in Galatia, he's talking of those they were the northern tribes. They were the northern 10 tribes that were lost. We know that by 1 Peter, his chapter 1, when he does his introduction, and he says, I'm addressing you people, you of the diaspora, or you who have been dispersed. You foreigners, you Gentile foreigners who have been dispersed into Galatia. And he lists out these towns. And so we know that Galatia was definitely a town full of northern tribe people from Israel that was dispersed. Okay? So when we look at the book of Galatians now, we know that the whole thing is going to be addressed to the northern tribes. And he addresses those Gentiles differently than he does the pagan Gentiles, which Corinth was pagan Gentiles, and we can tell that by their sexual, because one of the biggest things that the pagan religion had was their sexual immorality. They actually part of their pagan practices was to have orgies. And Paul addresses that. He addresses sexuality a lot to the Corinthians, which is one of the proofs that the Corinthian church, the town of the Corinthian community, was absolutely a pagan community. It wasn't necessarily the Gentiles that are dispersed from the 10 northern tribes. So now we're starting to see that when he talks about Gentiles, we can start to pick out these different communities by the way he's talking about, were they pagan Gentiles or were they dispersed Gentiles from the 10 northern tribes. And I think that's really cool. We're learning so much about that now. Well, we know that in Corinthians, and then if you just look at the history of Corinthians, it was a pagan town. It was a terrible pagan community. They had lots of goddesses. He talks about that. And then we also know that he had a lot of trouble there. He had, So when Paul was dealing with the Gentiles of the 10 northern tribes, like in Galatia, right? The circumcision factor of the Jews, they didn't go to the pagans necessarily and tell them that they had to be circumcised. They went back to their Israel buddies, their Israel family, and said, if you think you're going to fit back in, you have to be circumcised. So the circumcision faction that we read about, the Jews that believed in circumcision first, when they went and they raised up trouble like in Galatia, they knew that these were dispersed Israelites. And they were saying, if you want back in, if you want to be part of our family, the chosen family, the first thing you have to do is be circumcised. The circumcision faction, the Jewish, they didn't go into Corinth and raise up trouble like that, because these were pagans. These were rotten, filthy pagans that, as far as the Jewish people was concerned, they didn't have a hope. Okay, so we're looking at a whole different group here. So now, when we look at the false prophets, and that's what we're going to look at, the false apostles, the false prophets in Corinth, they're going to be looking at something completely different than like in Galatia. In Galatia, we're looking at the Jews who are stirring up trouble, the legalistic Jews who are stirring up trouble. But in Corinth, we're looking at at people who are trying to lead them into a different type of false gospel, and that's the false gospel that we see in pagan America. See? Now we can relate more to Corinth, for example, in America than we could to Galatia, because we're a pagan nation. Now just help us to see this as we move into this. Chapter 11. I would like to bear with verse 1. I would like you to bear with me in a little foolishness. Please do not bear with me. Please do bear with me, excuse me. For I am jealous for you with God's kind of jealousy. Well, we got to start. We're jumping in the middle of the story here. What's happening is that Paul had came and he planted this church. He's an apostle. He planted this church in Corinth. Okay, he came into Corinth, he planted this church, and then some false prophets or some false apostles came in behind him, and then they tried to corrupt it they tried to corrupt it with like an American gospel. Well, we know it's like an American gospel. Oh, you don't need to follow Paul. Keep in mind, what was Paul's gospel? Paul's gospel was you follow the Torah. You're not under the law, but you're obedient to the law. These were pagans. So there was the false apostles who came in and said, you don't need that law stuff. You got Messiah. Just like in America. Once we get that see that, now we're going to see it. So what Paul is, and we're jumping in the middle of the story here, Paul is really, like, he's in the middle of kind of a rebuke. Like, these people, they come in, I planted this church. I have a jealousy for you, God's jealousy. I came in and I told and I worked. I poured out my blood, my sweat and my blood for you people. I was beaten for you. We'll read that later down in this chapter. I was beaten for you people. I was tormented. I went hungry for you people. I went night and day in torment. When you hurt, I hurt. Right? And so he's in the middle of this rebuke. He's like, and then these people want to come in and say that I'm a piece of garbage, because that's really what's happening. These super apostles, and we're going to see that later, they came in, they had eloquent words, they had lots of money, they preached of prosperity. There's no doubt they was preaching prosperity. We'll see that. There's no doubt they was preaching prosperity. They was preaching this false gospel. And he said, these super apostles with these eloquent words, they come in and they say, I'm a nobody. I started, I planted. So he said, if I have any room to boast, it's in you. Because we'll also see, we won't get to it tonight, but we'll also see that they were requiring from him a letter of recommendation. The Corinthians were these super apostles said to the Corinthians who Paul planted this church. And then these super apostles come in and they said, he's a nobody. As a matter of fact, he needs to get a letter of recommendation. He needs to go back to the seminary school. If he really is from the seminary school, then have him go get a letter of recommendation. Because Paul addresses that, not in this chapter, we're not going to get to tonight. But he says, you are my letter of recommendation. You're here because of me, because of my work. You're my letter of recommendation. So anyway, that's a different part of the chapter. So I'm jumping in the middle of the story here. Verse 2, for I am jealous for you with God's kind of jealousy, since I promised to present you as a pure virgin in marriage to your one husband, the Messiah. And I fear that somehow your minds may be seduced away from simple and pure devotion to the Messiah, just as Eve was deceived by the serpent and his craftiness. For if someone comes and tells you about some other Yeshua than the one we told you about, or if you receive a spirit different from the one you received, or accept some so-called good news different from the good news you already accepted, you bear with him well enough. For I don't consider myself in any way inferior to these super apostles. I may not be a skilled speaker, but I do have the knowledge. Anyhow, we had made this clear to you every way and in every circumstance. We could break that down right there. If we put that into our American church right there. So now we know, because God has opened our eyes, we know what good news Paul came and preached. We know what gospel Paul came and preached. We've been learning about this. For months we've been learning about this, and especially over the last few weeks in Romans, we've really seen it. loud and clear. Now as we see that with different eyes, when Paul says, if anyone comes to you and preaches another Jesus to you, another Yeshua, if they come and preach another gospel to you, and I like that. He says, for verse 4, for if someone comes and tells you about some other Yeshua than the one we told you about, or if you receive a spirit different from the one you received. So if you receive a religious spirit or a kundalini spirit, right, what have we been dealing with? Right? If you receive some other spirit other than the one that you received, the Holy Spirit, other than the Ruach HaKodesh that you received when we prayed for you, when we laid hands on you, when we brought the good news to you. And then if you've received some other spirit, you've heard about some other Yeshua. That's what he's talking about, guys. Now we can really see the difference. Verse 5, for I don't consider myself in any way inferior to these super emissaries, these super apostles. These guys come with eloquent words. They come with fine, they got the money, they got the power, they're preaching the prosperity. They got the beautiful words, they can speak the beautiful words. And how many of those do we hear, you guys? Honestly. On the radio and on the television, those guys can speak words. We worked with a guy that John, you remember we worked with a guy, James, could speak so good that I'm telling you, he could make every pastor and bishop come to the altar just in case they weren't quite ready. He was so good. His words were so good. He was so eloquent, but he had a different gospel. A gospel of pride happened to be his gospel. But he could speak such good words. Guys. And we see that so many times on the radio and in the television. These guys got those and that's what Paul's doing. I feel no way inferior to these guys. I feel no way inferior, Paul says. And I can relate to that because I don't speak good like they do. I don't have the theology that they do. And so I think, I thought that for years. Oh, I wish I could speak like them. I wish I could pray. I wish I could draw an audience like them. I've resolved to decide I don't want that probably, but that's what Paul's talking about. For I don't consider myself in any way inferior to these super apostles. I may not be a skilled speaker, but I do have the knowledge. Whoo! Did Paul have the knowledge? Nobody had knowledge like Paul that I know of, and not in this. I'll say it again like I've said before. For Paul, by the time he was 12 years old, knew the Torah. Verse, chapter, by memory. By the time he was 20 years old, he knew the whole Tanakh. The whole, what we call the whole Old Testament. He knew the whole thing by memory. The whole thing. And if you look at his writings, everything he's doing is quoting the Old Testament. He quotes it over and every one of his letters, over and over and over and over. He's quoting the Old Testament. That was his dictionary. I listened to a thing from Jim Staley a while back, and he said that we finally discovered the Bible dictionary that they used back in the first century time. He said it was called the Tanakh. That was the only dictionary. Today we got all these Bible dictionaries, right? We got Strong's, and we got this, and we got that, Bull, Linger, whatever it is. We got all those different interpretations of what each one of those words mean, right? And the only thing they had back then was the Tanakh. That was their only Bible dictionary that they had. And that really actually convicted me because I refer to those things too much. I refer to them too much. Because they are absolutely just man's interpretation of what that word means. And I've really been seeing that lately. But I have knowledge, he says. And we, because it's the glory of kings to find it out. What did Paul have? He had a desire, he had a zeal. It says he had a zeal to understand God's word. God had, in Proverbs, it said that, it's the glory of God to conceal things. God concealed things to Paul too, but it was the glory of Paul to find them out. And he had a zeal to find them out. So the knowledge that he had is the same knowledge that we have. It's the revelation of the Lord. Anyhow, we made this clear to you in every way and in every circumstance. Verse 7. Or did I sin in humbling myself so that you could be exalted, in proclaiming God's good news to you free of charge? To me, that sounds like he's talking about, again, remember what he's doing here. He's rebuking these super apostles. So if you read this the way he's reading that, obviously they charged for their knowledge and for their well speaking. They must have. To me, it sounds like a prosperity gospel, because that's what he's saying. Or did I sin and humble myself so that you can be exalted, proclaiming good news to you free of charge? So he's obviously rebuking something that they said that he was doing wrong. I robbed other congregations by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and had needs, I did not burden anyone. My needs were met by the brothers who came from Macedonia. In nothing have I been a burden to you, nor will I be. The truthfulness of the Messiah is in me, so that this boast concerning me is not going to be silenced anywhere in Achaia. Why won't I ever accept your support? Is it that I don't love you? God knows I do. No, I do it and will go on doing it in order to cut the ground from under those who want to excuse to boast that they were the same as we do. He was so determined to be holy and to be righteous before this Corinthian congregation that he wouldn't even accept their help so that he could cut the head off the serpent of those who were trying to make him look bad, who were trying to say, oh, we work as hard as Paul. We do the same type of work as him. Paul worked for himself. He put no burden on them. He didn't accept nothing from them. And these false apostles were saying, oh, we are the same as Paul. Verse 13, the fact is that such men are pseudo-emissaries, which is false apostles. They tell lies about their work and masquerade as apostles of the Messiah. There is nothing surprising in that, for the adversary himself masquerades as an angel of light. So it's no great thing if his workers masquerade as servants of righteousness. They will meet the end their deeds deserve. For years I've said that we've talked about this many times, each one of you individually, we've talked about this many times, that the institutionalized church system that we know isn't broke. We can't go fix it. It's designed by the adversary. Paul's talking about the same exact thing right here. It's designed by it came masqueraded as an angel of light. That false gospel that we see on every corner, those false apostles that set up this another Jesus. There's another Yeshua that they proclaimed. It's not the Yeshua that Paul proclaimed. It's obvious. It's very, very obvious that the Yeshua that we see proclaimed in most of the buildings around the area, around the country, most of the buildings called churches around the country, is not the Yeshua or not the Jesus that Paul proclaimed, according to what we've been learning the last few months. So obviously, those were set up as Paul described it. See how things look different now? Now, as we think about that, because every one of us, because we have a heart for our friends, we have a heart for the people that we went to church with and the people that we worked with and all these people, we have a heart, such a deep compassion for them, right? That when we hear about the truth, when we see the miracle of God, the power of God, when we see that God delivers and God heals, when we see that we've been taught something different or something, right? And then when our eyes are opened up, our first response almost always is, I need to go back and fix the church. I need to tell the church they're wrong. And I've said for years, the church isn't broken. It's set up exactly the way it was set up by the enemy, and it was set up exactly the way he designed it to be set up. It's not broken. You can't fix it. Now, you can reach people that are there in it. You can reach people that are there in it, and their eyes can be opened up, and they can come out of it. But you can't fix the system because the system is designed by the way the designer of it made it. And that Paul's talking about that same exact thing right here. The fact is that such men, verse 13, I'll start there again, read it again. The fact is that such men are false apostles. They are preaching a different gospel other than the gospel that Paul himself received by revelation from Jesus Christ directly in the desert. They tell lies about their work and masquerade as emissaries or masquerade as apostles of the Messiah. There is nothing surprising in that. For the adversary himself masquerades as an angel of light. So it's no great thing if his workers masquerade as servants of righteousness. It's no great thing if the system, if the Bible colleges and the theology classes and all the seminaries are set up by some false apostle, if they're set up by some false teaching, and the people that go there and are trained by them are from the enemy, from this false teaching, then it should be no great surprise that the workers are masqueraded as servants of righteousness. And they'll meet their end. Their deeds deserve. Verse 16, I repeat, don't let anyone think I am a fool. But even if you do, at least receive me as a fool, so that I too may do a little boasting. What I'm saying is not in accordance with the Lord, rather this conceited boasting is spoken as a fool would speak. Since many people boast in a worldly way, I too will boast this way. For since you yourselves are so wise, you gladly put up with fools. Can we relate to that? Since we are so wise in the world, we gladly put up with these fools. We've talked about this too. We've let worldly knowledge and wisdom consume us so much. It's so much more, guys, worldly knowledge and worldly wisdom is so much more important to us than what God's knowledge is. He says, since you're so wise, what's he say? For since yourselves are so wise, you gladly put up with fools. We're so wise, we're so busy gaining and learning and acquiring worldly knowledge and using worldly knowledge that we just let any fool in the pulpit. Right? We just accept whatever they say in the pulpit. We don't take time to investigate it. We don't have time to investigate it. We have to assume that when they went to the seminary and they learned what they learned, we have to assume it must be true. I don't have time to look into it myself because I'm too busy with my job. I'm too busy with my worldly wisdom. I'm too busy in life. So I must just take their word for it that what they received is from God at these seminaries, and I'll just believe whatever they preach out of the pulpit is true. That's what Paul's saying. Because you're so wise, you listen to these fools. Verse 20, you put up with it if someone makes slaves of you, exploits you, takes you in, puffs himself up, slaps you in the face. How? You say, well, that's never happened to me. That's never happened to me. Not in the church. Let me ask you this, every one of you. When you realize that you've been lied to for the last 20 years or whatever, how did you feel? Slapped in the face. Right? Isn't that how you felt when you realized that somebody had been fooling you all these years, telling you falseness all these years? You felt like you was slapped in the face. You felt like you was exploited. Right? That's exactly what Paul's talking about. To my shame, I must admit that we have been too weak to do such things. Paul says, I've been too weak to do that to you. I could be puffed up. I could come in and like a roar. But he says, I've been too weak. But if anyone dares to boast about something, I'm talking like a fool, I am just as daring. Are they Hebrew speakers? So am I. Are they people of Israel? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Messiah? I'm talking like a madman. He's going crazy. I am a better one. I've worked much harder, been in prison more often, suffered more beatings, been near death over and over. I mean, he's laying out his case here. I mean, Paul has paid the price. He's paid the price. Yes, Paul was a sinner. He admits it. He was tied into that legal system of the rabbinic system, that Phariseeism. And when Jesus came and convicted him, man, he's paid the price. He paid the price for that. He goes on to say, been in prison more often, suffered more beatings, been near death over and over. 5 times I received 40 lashes, less one, from the Jews. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. In my many travels, I have been exposed to danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, dangers in the city, danger in the desert, danger at sea, danger from false brothers. I have told and endured hardship, often not had enough sleep, been hungry and thirsty, frequently gone without food, been cold and naked. And besides these external matters, there is the daily pressure of my anxious concern for all the congregations, who is weak without my sharing his weakness, who falls into sin without my burning inside. Man, I can feel that. That I can feel. The anxiousness that you feel for your brothers and sisters. When they hurt, you hurt. When they're in sin, you're burning inside. Then we have to sort it out. Then we have to sort them emotions out. How do we handle that with agape love? Right? Then we have to sort it all out inside of us, because I can tell you, and I think a lot of you guys can relate to this, the number of nights that you spent not being able to sleep because a brother or a sister, because somebody that you know is in a bad place, whether it's emotionally or whether it's spiritually or whether it's mentally. Somebody that you know is off, and somebody that you know is believing a false gospel, and you're trying so hard to reach them, and you love them so much, and you want their eyes to be opened, and yet they continually just stay there. And how many sleepless nights do we have? How many tears have we shed for these people, praying and begging that God would open their eyes, and God would touch them and heal them and deliver them? Verse 30, if I must boast, I will boast about things that show how weak I am. God the Father of the Lord Yeshua, blessed be he forever, knows that I'm not lying. When I was in Dalmatia, the governor under King Aretas had the city of Dalmatia guarded in order to arrest me. But I was lowered in a basket through an opening in the wall and escaped his clutches. You know, Paul, he's really laying out a case here, and he's saying it's his weakness. His weakness is to not be proud in his flesh, to not be boastful, to not claim. And what I really see, probably one of the things I really see is that I really believe that Paul is saying here that he's remaining pliable and teachable. One of our weaknesses is to always remain, I think, is to never feel like we've arrived, to never feel like we've known it all, that we have it all, to always be teachable by our brothers and sisters, by the Holy Spirit, by revelation, and to always be ready to change, and always be ready to move when God moves us. And I think that's one of the things that really shows our strength in our spirit, but it shows our weakness in our flesh, that we've never arrived. One of the biggest things that I see with Christian leaders is that they're really unteachable. They've learned it all. They've passed the class. They've took the course. They've got A's or B's or whatever they've gotten in their seminary. They've got their degree on the wall, and now they've learned it. And this is one of the things that, I don't remember who it was, somebody I was talking with a while back. It was maybe John was talking about that. But when you go to college, when you went to college, right, when you didn't go there with the idea that you was going to prove that what the professor was teaching was wrong, right? You went there to learn what he had. You went there to receive the knowledge he had. You went there to learn as much as you could from him, the professors. You went there to get your diploma so you could do your job. But you didn't go there with the idea, well, I'm going to go there and question everything they teach me. Whatever they taught you was you paid them money. You paid them money to go there to receive the knowledge that they had. That's what men and women do when they go to Bible college. They're not going there to try to pick apart or to try to add to whatever they're learning. When you went to college, you didn't go there to get knowledge and then add to it. You went there to get the knowledge, to get a degree so you get a job. Right? Well, that's the same way when people go to Bible college. They're paying money to go there to learn whatever they can learn. They're not going there to pick it apart. They're going there to learn. So once they've learned it, they've arrived. Once they have the diploma hanging on the wall, once they've graduated the 4 years or whatever, 6 or 8 years, whatever it is, once they've graduated and they got the diploma hanging on the wall, they've arrived. They've received all the knowledge that the professors have to give them. So at that moment, maybe they're not completely unteachable, because even us in the world, we go to college and we get our degree, but even as we work in our jobs, right, we learn things that add to our education, right? Experience adds to what we've learned in our education. And so it's the same way, I think, with pastors or whatever, that they go there and they learn whatever they could learn. So it isn't that they're completely unteachable, that they also know they get revelation. But then there's these grounded facts that they won't, whatever they learn, they're not going to, whatever they add to what they learned, maybe that's the way to say it. Whatever they've learned on top of what they got in college is as a bonus. But they're not going there to unlearn what they learned in college. Mm-hmm. And that's where the key is. That's why they're unteachable. That's why their eyes have been waxed shut. And if it's the gospel, other than the gospel, according to 2 Corinthians, now we can either believe the word of God is truth or not truth. That's up to each one of us individually. If we believe that this whole thing is God's truth, and we believe that 2 Corinthians chapter 11 is part of God's truth, it's as much of God's truth as from Genesis to Revelation, then we have to believe that anybody who's preaching a different gospel other than the gospel that Paul preached is a false apostle. That's what it says in chapter 11. Anybody who's preaching a different Jesus other than the Jesus that Paul taught is a false apostle or a false teacher. That's what chapter 11 says. And now that we've learned what his good news was, now we have to face this reality and this truth. And each one of you can make that decision for yourself. See how once we learned Romans, or we're still in the process of it, but once we got this, now everything in the New Testament is going to be different. Now everything, and we're going to understand the New Testament in a whole different way. Now we can understand the Gentiles who were from the 10 northern tribes, and some of those letters, that's what he's dealing with. And some of them, like Corinth, was pagan Gentiles, and that's what he's dealing with. And now we can see the difference between, because honestly, if we go to Galatians, we're going to see Paul saying the same thing. We'll go there real fast. Galatians chapter 1, just one verse, and I'll show you. Or 2 verses or whatever, but we'll just start at chapter 1 and verse 6. Just real fast, just to show you, he's saying the same thing, but he's talking about 2 separate things completely. I am astounded that you are so quick to remove yourselves from me, the one who called you by Messiah's grace, and turned to some other supposedly good news. He's saying the same thing. Here I am. I come and I planted to you guys. I come to you guys, you Gentiles of the 10 northern tribes in Galatia. I came to you and I brought you the good news. And he says, and I'm astounded how quickly you turn from that good news and you went to some supposedly other good news. He's saying the same exact thing to the Galatians as he said to the Gentiles or to the Corinthians, but it's 2 separate, completely different things. What they were getting over here was in Galatia was they were being told they had to be circumcised before they could fit in. What they were told in Corinth is that they didn't have to do anything except ask Jesus into their heart and pay a lot of money. I think it's just amazing how now our eyes are completely opened up to see some of these things.